What we're going to do today is we're going to set up your sketchbook or your paper, and with a ruler or not, we're going to divide into 6 different rectangles. So one dividing it in half and then into thirds. And we're going to do step 1, 2, 3 of each of those. And what we're going to look at is how we structure or do the progression to draw the lips from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. And we're going to repeat it frontal view and then profile view. So that's one way, and this is, notice I'm going to go step by step on how to do this. Although you must know that there are tons of other ways using more cubic geometric shapes. Let's go ahead and walk you through. Grabbing my ruler, and I'm just going to eyeball it. You can actually, if you want to keep it nice and neat, you're going to measure it. So I'm working on this should be 11, I'm sorry, this is 11 by 14. So just dividing this in half. With tiny little marker, I'm going to divide it right through the middle. And 14, it's going to be just a little over 5. So let's say right about here. Right about here. And there we go. So ideally, you would want to keep this for reference. What we're going to do today is something that you can go back and revisit and use as a tool in order to come back and practice over and over. Because what we're looking here as is going to be a generic mouth. And of course, we know mouths, the parts of it, the upper lip, lower lip, the muscles around it. We're going to do it in a very, very simple, basic way. So this first one, I'm actually going to try to zoom in so you could see it a lot easier. There we go. So for this first box, I'm going to go ahead and just draw a line. And what this does, it's going to give me the position of the mouth. So it's going to be looking straight forward. It's not tilted. It's not at an angle. And it's also going to tell me how big I'm going to draw this in my square. So it's giving me a proportion. At the edges, I'm just going to draw 2 little darker areas, 2 little dots. And one of the methods that we use is we're going to find the middle, which should be right about here. And I'm drawing a tiny little line upwards. And from that middle, I'm going to get a sense. Now, I mentioned we're going to be drawing a generic mouth. Usually, we would be looking at a photo, at a reference photo or a model. So I do recommend trying this when you have someone, a model, or a photo that you're working from to actually do these steps. What we do is we're going to, from the middle, think about an oval shape, and we're going to try to kind of get a sense of the thickness and the volume of that upper lip. So these touch at the edge, and once again, they could be way rounder, way thicker, or a little bit shorter at the edge, a little bit wider in the middle. This all depends on the characteristics of your subject. Here, like I said, we're doing somewhat a general looking mouth. Obviously, we're dealing with symmetry, so these would match on both sides. Just about the same size and thickness. And then I'm going to find from the bottom 1, which is going to give me the general thickness of the lower lip. So this is something, and I'm doing them a little bit darker so you can actually see them in this demo. But you would do these super light. And I'm talking with the lightest pencil. If you have a 2H, 4H, you would structure and create the steps from extremely light in order to do step 2. So we're going to go to step 2, and I'm just going to repeat those steps. I'm going to get the same line with the edges at the corners, find the middle. I'm going to go a little bit faster so we have a chance to finish all of it. And I'm just going to recreate step 1. I'm going to make these a little bit lighter since you know how they look in that first square. And the opposite way, creating that symmetry, looking for the lower one and the thickness of it. And also how it just goes almost to a little bit past middle of the upper circle. Now, once I have this, I'm going to want to add the upper curve where the two circles meet. And I'm going to find this lower semicircle that is going to become the lower and the upper part of the chin, lower part of the lip. Once I have that, what I'm going to look for next is the curvature and a little bit of that shaping of the upper lip, which connects sometimes a little bit closer to the edge of the mouth or sometimes a little bit further. And I'm also going to look for the curvature and the connection of the lip at the bottom. So what we're doing here is just easier actually, ways to get much more precise when you're drawing mouths. And it's just this easy step 1, 2, 3 to get us to number 3, which I hope you're keeping up. Let me know in the chat if I'm going a little too fast. We are, we can see it. If not, we're going to go to step number 3. So I'm going to go ahead and do step number 1. I'm going to make them extremely light this time. Getting the sense of the thickness again. I'm going to go ahead and do step number 2. I'm also keeping it very light. You might not be able to see it as clearly as dark as the previous steps, but I did these super dark so you could see them easier. And I'm going to do the beginning of what would be step 3. So from the corners of the mouth, I began to develop the shape of the lip. Now, here's one of the biggest tips I can give you. When you draw these lines, you don't want these lines to be too harsh. You want to kind of blend them, shade them in instead of draw them in. So as I shape the curvature of the upper lip and the lower lip, what I don't want is these lines to be like, they do have a name, unless it would look like they always have lipstick pretty much, where the lines are so harsh they take a little bit of that realistic look away. So I'm just kind of penciling them in very softly. And from here, the next step would be to define, in this case, we look at the mouth and how it's closed. If it was open, if we would see a little bit of teeth or not. We're going to look at the shape and how the lower lip, and it's good to have maybe an eraser, soften up some of these lines. So you can begin to shape and the overlap of the upper lip, which generally gives us another little shape, and how the upper lip and the lower lip are working together. So is the curve. And this is where you really define the character of the mouth. How the upper lip and lower lip are interacting with each other, meaning which one's overlapping, which one is there a curve, and they're very subtle. Because as soon as you add upward or downward curve, you're adding expression to the lips. So here I'm going more for that little bit of, think about the Mona Lisa's smile, where it's kind of neutral, although you can begin to see a little bit of kind of a hint of a smile. And I'm going to go ahead and begin to work the light. So what I did here is kind of develop a little bit of volume, the planes of the lips, and we're going to try to understand how the light works. So I'm going to just imagine that the light is coming from above and a little bit to the right, which means everything that's up here is going to receive some light, but as the lip tucks in, this is going to be darker. As the light hits this part of the lip, there's going to be light and even highlights, but as it turns down and away, it's going to be, again, darker in the shade. So what I want to do is add a little bit of graphite, right? And sometimes you will have cast shadow, meaning the upper lip and the way the light is hitting will cause a little bit of cast shadow. Depending on the light, sometimes the nose will cast shadow into the lip as well. So we have to consider all these different things. If the light is coming from this side, then this side will probably be a little more in the shade. And you'll see a little lighter areas of the lip on this side. But thinking about how the lip curves down and in, and obviously this one's curving out into the light and then down away from it. I'm going to go ahead and grab a blending tool. This is a paper blender, but you could use a paper towel, a tissue, a Q-tip, and what you do is you just fold it and just blend your graphite. I'm going to use the paper blender, and what I want you to use today is a circular motion. So what you're going to do is you're going to generate the volume instead of just going up and down to kind of color in your volume. What you want to do is kind of circle it and shape it so it's round all the way around. And you don't want, like we said earlier, areas that are completely the same tone, because we know that some are going to be darker because they're in the shadow or the shaded area, and some are going to be in the light. So here I'm just giving a little bit of volume. I'm trying to play a little bit with how the light would be working, which it means darker, rounder, and lighter at the top. Lighter around this edge. Lighter, meaning less pressure at the top. Darker as it rounds down and away. And remember, this is just step one in terms of shading. I'm going to want to add a little bit of values, or in this case, grays, to the outside of the lip. So some of the skin. And I'm going to consider light as well. So I know the light is coming from this direction. That means this side is going to be a little bit in the shade. Now, I don't want this to be as dark as the lips. I want it to be just a little bit lighter. So I'm using less pressure. And notice that I'm not adding any graphite, any pencil markings to this area. But if I did, I would also use that circular motion. The smaller and more continuous you do these circles, the better your texture and your light is going to be handled. So I honestly don't need to do this, because with the graphite that it's already on my paper blender, it's going to be just enough. So there we go. I'm adding a little bit of that shaded area. I'm going to need a little more shadow right under this lip. right at the top of our chin. And I'm going to go just outside the edge of the mouth, right to the corners, and around to the other side. Now notice that I'm using that semicircular motion, circular motion, following the muscles and the way they round from the corner of the mouth down towards the middle and then back up opposite to the other corner of the mouth. So there's a way to understand what the muscles and the structure underneath all this skin and inside and out of the lips is working, how it's working. So this needs me to do a step 2. I'm going to grab a little bit of a darker pencil. This is a 4B, and I'm going to go for just touches of darker areas, just very soft. A little more at the edges so I can highlight that shadow underneath, a little bit rounder, a little bit of cast shadow. So I'm just going kind of over the same line, small tiny little circles, adding a little shade to the top of the bottom of the upper lip and to the bottom of the lower lip where the shadows would be. And just going along the aperture of the mouth all the way to the other side. I'm going to do it step by step. Notice that adding a little bit extra dark with the 4B immediately adds more contrast. Therefore, you begin to have more realistic sense of value, light, overlap. So the forms become a little more realistic. And then just to finish it up, we're going to go back to a 2B or HB pencil, and I'm going to add just a few of the lines. Now, what I want you to do with these is I really want you to follow the shape as if you were, and you don't want to do too many. You don't want to make them too dark. Usually what you'll see is a little bit of the bending of the skin of the lip and how it's curving just as it finds some of the edges. And it goes a little bit upward, a little bit less. I'm doing less upward, more in the lower lip downward, and little longer and deeper, darker, right in the middle. Not so much at the edges. I'm going to blend them again just a little bit. And then the final touch is going to be a little bit of highlights. So with an eraser, I have this Tombow 0, or I also have kneaded eraser. So with the kneaded eraser, the great thing is you can just pinch it, make it very sharp point. And by just touching it to the graphite, you're going to lift some of these highlights. And the reason we added some of those lines is because they're shadow, it means you're also going to have highlights contrasting. The darker the shadow, it means the brighter the light. So think about any day when at noon, when the sun is brightest, that's when you see the darkest shadows. And usually they are really sharp edges. So sometimes the softer the light, the softer the highlights or values of the shadows. And I can retouch them, just soften up some of these edges. And final touch, I'm just going to add one bright highlight right here at the top of this lip, right in between these lines. Just adding a little bit of extra texture, literally drawing with our eraser. And as long as you get rid of those lines, that they're not too harsh, and you actually work with blending and volume, you'll be in good shape. And this takes, like I said, a little bit of extra practice, but the best way is going to be with a reference photo. And we are going to do that today. Okay, so there's our chart with step 1, 2, 3 from a frontal view. And obviously, we're just focused on the mouth, but this, as you know, it would continue up into the nose and around the cheeks and following the muscles, the structure of the face. We just want to stay focused on this basic area, the mouth. So now we're going to go to our fourth square, the first one down at the bottom. And we're going to do a profile view of it. This one's going to be a little bit quicker. So for this one, what we're going to do is same thing. A couple of important things. Because it's a profile, the line, the size is going to be a little bit shorter, so it's only half the size on the profile. But there's a couple of very important things here. There is an invisible line, a line that you need to visualize, which usually goes something like this. And I'm going to draw it in so you could see it, but you don't have to draw it in when you do your drawings. But you do need to visualize it. You need to see it, measure it, and in your drawing, apply it. You don't actually have to draw it on your drawing, but the fact that you have to see it is very important. In this case, because this is a chart, you can actually draw it, but you want to draw it very light. So what does this do? This is going to show you, if this is the edge of my mouth, this is the corner, and this is the profile view, what it's going to do, it's going to show me, again, I'm looking for that top lip thickness and shape by creating sort of an oval or a circle. And notice that it touches that line. So what this line is for is to show you the relationship between the top lip and the bottom lip. Most of the time, you're going to have the top lip a little bit out and further covering the top of the lower lip. And this line can shift. It could be a little bit straighter. It could be a little bit more, depending on the thickness and how much this upper lip covers the lower lip. So I'm looking for the thickness of the lower lip. And I'm just going to draw that circle right there. I'm going to draw a couple of extra lines. One, which is going to be here, giving us the upper lip area. And I'm going to do one here, where it gives us just that curve for the lower into the chin. So it's two lines basically like this. And you can begin to see it. Okay, so that was step 1. And you can begin to see how if you have this anywhere near the right proportion, ratio, size, you're going to have a great drawing. And remember, the key here is not to draw these too dark, because you want to do this step by step in order to set up your drawing for stage 3, where the structure is set up. So I'm visualizing that line, and I'm measuring the thickness of the upper lip. I'm comparing it to the bottom line, and I can see where the bottom lip, again, I'm visualizing it. I'm not drawing it. But if I were to draw it, there it is. The upper lip and the lower lip touch the edge of that line, and then I just focus on the thickness. And there it goes. I'm going to add the line for the upper part of the lip and down into the chin. Just a couple more lines. So step 1 completed here. Step 2, I'm going to look for the connection between the edge of the mouth and the line, the formation of that upper lip, the curvature I'm going to look a little bit, sometimes from profile, you see it a little bit easier, a little bit better. The rounding and the curvature of the upper lip. And finally, curvature of the lower lip. There we go. And that's how far you would want to be in stage 2. Just a little dented curvature here at the front. And we're going to go to step 3. So we're going to repeat. Length of the mouth. Visualize that line. Thickness. Making these lines a little bit lighter, a little looser. Connecting some of these lines into our lips. And from here, we're going to develop our rendering. So I begin to notice the line in the middle, which is going to be our darkest, one of our darkest areas, and how it covers and rounds right here at the tip. Now remember, some of these lines, you just want to hint at them. You don't want to draw them. What you want to do is render them. And what I mean by that is using your graphite, you're going to blend and use values to create those edges, not lines. Because it'll be really tough to erase some of that rendering after you've done it in order to create that realism. Now here's a lot easier. I'm just adding shadow at the bottom of the upper lip. Cast shadow right under at my upper lip, and then at the bottom, just like this. It could be very simple. From here, I'm just going to go ahead and render. Blend it in. Considering what light is doing. Considering the shadows. Circular motion. Softer pressure without too much heavy pressure. It's better if you just spend a little longer in one area, building up a little darker value where you need to, instead of doing it fast with more pressure. Soft pressure a little longer is better results than faster with more pressure. I could bring in a little bit of eraser. And I'm going outside the lips, a little bit into the skin, just to confirm that I have some of this skin tone, some of the muscles, how they connect at the corner of the mouth, and how they round up. Again, with that circular blending motion, following the shape of the muscle. I'm going to add a couple of extra lines for contrast. A little more contrast in the value at the lower lip. And do this in stages, layers. You don't want to finish it all in one pass. It takes just a little bit of patience. And then you bring your eraser to create some of these highlights. Some at the upper lip. Right around the edge, you got to consider the skin, some of the texture of your skin, and the way the light is working with it. I just like to add these lines as if I was drawing with the eraser. instead of erasing, what I'm doing is I'm drawing with the eraser. And I'm going to add those final just couple of lines. The final tiny little details. Some of the creases of my upper lip down at the bottom. Now this is a very dangerous stage as well, because you could get carried away and add just a little bit too much in terms of detail, where I could have been happy with the way the lips were done just a moment ago. But if you want to begin to push detail, then you need to know how far, because it could always keep going and going and going, where you find yourself having to draw every single pore and every single little hair. At that point, you're doing something that is a different type of drawing. So considering how much detail you need all the way along, these lines is the place where you could find yourself doing a little too much, and then your drawing is going to look either incomplete, forcing you to add way, way, way more detail, and then you overcooked it. Sometimes we'll feel, oh, well, now it's ruined. There's no way for you to go back. So here we are, step 1, 2, 3. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. And there's our chart. So we have a chart showing us frontal view, steps 1, 2, 3, and profile, structure setup, step 1, 2, 3. And you can get here easy. The idea is to learn this and not have to do this every single time. But when you're going to do this drawing, you want to have this in mind and kind of scaffold yourself very safely, so when you're here, it all looks already set up, making every part of actually drawing and rendering much, much easier. Okay, so for our final drawing, and yikes, we have about 20 minutes. Okay, that should be good. We're gonna make a quick drawing, and the image that I have for you today includes, it's this one. So notice that these lips have a little bit of open mouth, so we could see some teeth, and it also has a little bit of nose. So yeah, we'll go ahead and set this up as a 20-minute drawing. It's going to be minimum detail. You'll find yourself planning out, okay, how can I get there and make this a perfect 20-minute drawing? Well, we're going to start with what I mentioned earlier, the angle of the mouth. So I'm not going to draw a line like this, because from corner to corner of the mouth, what I see is something more like this. And I need to get a good sense. One way would be to place your pencil right over your subject and draw a line with your pencil from corner to corner, and then just transfer it right back to your paper. Or right on top of your image, your reference. Meaning you would have the picture and you place your pencil right on top of it so you could see the angle. So I see the angle as something like this. I'm going to go ahead and draw the line. Very light. I'm going to go ahead and put the corners of the mouth. And we do have a little bit of smiling on this one. Now, because there's a little bit of open mouth, I have to consider that. It's upwards and downwards. It's not right through the middle. So that middle of the mouth is going to be right about here. I'm going to consider the thickness. So I can draw my circle. And this is a very, very sharp oval with a little roundness right at the middle. And it goes a little bit thicker later on when we've set up the middle of the mouth. So here I'm just looking at the thickness of the upper lip, rounding it right into the corner where it gets a little sharper. And now I'm going to find that thickness of the bottom lip. So this one, I'm going to get the length of it and then the thickness of it. Kind of like this. And again, this is just setting up your scaffolding, as I said earlier. So you can always come back if I need to erase, which I'm actually going to go ahead and do now, some of these lines, or redo the angle of the mouth or the thickness of the lip. You're in great shape because you haven't invested any time really in drawing. You're just actually focused on setting up the structure so you can actually get to draw much, much easier. Focused on the right things. So from here, step 2, I'm going to look for that curvature of the shape without drawing the lines too harsh. I'm looking at that actual character, curvature, and all these, what we would call the beginnings of subtle details. The character of the roundness of that lip, and those soft little, very delicate curves, whether it's curving up or down. Remember, these lines you want to keep as light as possible as you just begin to build them. So here we have that little bit of that middle of the mouth overlap where I could still see the top and the bottom lip meeting. And from right about this area here, it touches just at the bottom of the lip. And I could see a little bit of that shadow underneath. So this is more of the upper lip with that open mouth, as the lower part of the lip comes straight down and curves. So I'm going to have to focus a little bit on this inner part of the lower lip and the roundness. No detail. Right now I'm just getting a sense of general lines, some of the curves, some of them a little more delicate than others. And I'm going to go right here into the middle of the lip. I'm going to get a sense of how much that mouth is open. And then curve right in. I'm not even worried or thinking about teeth or anything else right now. Just want to make sure I got just the general sense of, should I continue or should I erase and start over? Is this lining up? Is it curving? Is it the thickness? Is it the right angle and shape and size? Is there already a little bit of likeness? And I think we can. I think we should continue here. I'm just adding a few extra lines that would take us right into the nose. But I'm going to go ahead and skip it. So this is step 2. I'm going to go ahead and just begin a little bit of, I squint. And I squint really, really hard, almost as if I was looking right through my eyelashes. And what I want to identify is, what is the darkest area in this drawing? So I can go ahead and add a little bit of graphite, dark values right in here, obviously right in here, and right in here. And notice there's a little gap of skin between the lower lip and that curve right underneath here, starting off towards the chin. And I think that's enough to begin to blend it in, give it a little bit of shape, a little bit of volume, Focusing still on the darker values, but beginning to look at all of the little volumes, all of the subtle roundness, lightness or darkness around the rest of the area of these lips. Circular motions, grabbing some of that graphite, following the shape. More circular, and this is where you're beginning to actually feel like you're drawing. So it is one of those stages where you need to pay more attention. You need to be more patient. You need to be more observant, because now you're really starting to deal with details. I'm going to go ahead and add some really light values where the teeth would be, because although they're white, light, it is not. When you squint, you can see it's not the lightest area. The highlight and a little bit of highlight on the teeth are the lightest areas. So you want to make sure you cover and get the right tones of value all around, even inside the mouth. And as I move around, I'll be back to it. I'll get back and finish up some of those lines. But the general value of it, it's pretty much taken care of. So here I'm looking at the shadows, some of the lights as the mouth curves and bends and rounds right into the middle. I'm dealing with a couple of shadows from the nose. I could do that. But then here at the bottom, there's a lot of play of light, more shadow on this side. A little bit of higher contrast in some of these lines. But what would seem as a lot of light on this skin here, I'm just going to give it a little bit, just a little bit of that tone, so it's not the white of the paper. And I'll do the same down here. There we go. So we begin to do layers. I created a nice, I think I have the beginnings of a nice kind of value sense of the entire drawing. I'm just going to go look for just some of those extra darker areas to add more graphite. And it's all the way down underneath this lip. So I could actually begin to add some of those lines, very tiny, but I do see them. And some of the overlap, some of these shadows, right at the bottom of the lip, and how they're going to be very different from the teeth since they're not touching the lower lip. I'm adding a couple extra lines. A little darker graphite. So this is all going to be blended in. Darker edges right at the corner of the mouth where you see the teeth. And I'm going to go ahead and just put a couple of lines. Darker at the top where the teeth are. And I'm making these lines extremely soft. Literally, it's just caressing some graphite right on the paper almost. Very, very, very light. There it is. And just a little hint, tiny, tiny darker value right at the edge of that lip. And again, this is one of those tricks. If you draw a line, your lips, I think they call them clown lips, where you can actually see the line all the way around. You don't want that. You want to just add a little bit of value, because what you're dealing with is a lip that's going away and turning away from the light. So you just want that soft edge, kind of like I'm doing here, with tiny little soft graphite circular motions, giving it a little extra volume, where you almost don't even have to blend it. And here I'm going to focus once again on some of these lines, and the way the volume of the lip, the roundness, is a little bit flatter at the edges. And then right about here, we begin to get a beautiful rounding of the shape. Some of them are just in the middle, some of them all the way from the edge. There's a lot of highlights in this lower lip, and we'll break those up. A little bit of this lower side shadow. Very, very few lines. I already think they've been dealt with at the upper lip. And a little extra graphite right here at the bottom. Because this area of the lip here, the way it's curving, and it doesn't touch that lower lip, it needs to be a little bit stronger. So as I add a little bit of graphite, I want to make sure it's not too much. So I'm going to stop there, blend this, more circular motions, preserve some of these lines. Make sure I'm following the roundness, so I am still looking at my reference image. I'm adding just a little more value right here at the edge. Because believe it or not, your lower lip, and in many cases your upper lip, it has a front, which would be from here to here, and it has a side as it turns away. Because our face is not flat like a wall. It curves. So you want to draw that curve, insinuate it with these light tricks. So it's a lot lighter here, and from here towards the edges, it's going to get darker. And I use these round circular motions with a little bit of extra graphite to tell my viewer how it's supposed to be, what kind of shape it is, and how it's working in space. Because in the end, what you realize here is we're creating an illusion, trying to make something 3D on a 2D surface. And these are all tricks. So we can see that, oh, it's a mouth. It's a mouth that is just a tiny little bit open, and it's kind of smiling, and it's about this and that, and it gets to the point where you can tell who it is and what it's doing, the kind of expression. Oh, it's happy, it's sad, and beyond. Just with these very few simple techniques. I'm going to go ahead and bring the eraser, because it does need some of these extra highlights right here. Just a touch. Very few touches right here. And I think one last one, important one here, right here on this tooth. It's just a little bit of moisture there. That's why we get that reflection. A couple of lines and strokes right around here. Erase some of these lines. And there we have it. Now, if we were to consider continuing up to the nose, we would go ahead and do that same thing we did on week 2, which is create the structure where we see a geometric setup and begin to build with light by adding lights and darks with the shapes, forming some of these values, working with shadows, cast shadows around the edges, and slowly but surely develop the likeness. And I actually went really, really fast here just to kind of hint at where this could go. Where, of course, you want to take your time to develop each step, to develop the structure the way it's supposed to be, without some of these harsh lines. And there we have it. So there's the mouth. And for next week, we're going to try to put it all together, finally. We're going to take eyes, nose, mouth, and we're going to put together a portrait using all of the structure, step-by-step techniques that we saw these past 3 weeks. So I hope you enjoyed it.